and welcome to EnergyTech Essentials from the Net Zero Technology Centre. This is a series of sessions where we're bringing in some expert partners who are involved in supporting and shaping startups as they develop technologies to share some insight, to answer some questions, to get into some of the details of the challenges that many energy tech founders might experience. And today we are joined by Eden Scott, and Richard Cross is joining us here from Eden Scott to talk about talent acquisition playbook for energy tech founders, because building a business isn't just about the technology, it's also about the people that you bring on board, and getting the best people are obviously a key part of that experience as well. So morning, Richard, how are you?
Morning, Ed. Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. And may I start by saying a big thank you for the invitation and for having me on today. It's much appreciated.
Perfect. So today's session, we're going to cover lots of different topics, everything from how you recruit, how you onboard staff, looking at retention and other elements as well. If you're watching along live, of course, feel free to pop any questions into the chat or the Q&A function on the side. But maybe to kick us off, Richard, maybe a little bit of an introduction to yourself and Eden Scott, and a big opening question. You work with lots of founders, particularly I think your side in the technical engineering energy space as well. So what are some of the common talent challenges that maybe early founders face, and how can they overcome them?
Yeah, absolutely, Ed. So yeah, just to briefly introduce myself, I suppose. So I'm Richard Cross, business manager at Eden Scott. We're a privately owned recruitment firm that's been supporting growth sectors in Scotland for over 20 years now. I'm part of our Talent Spark initiative, which helps early stage businesses build their first teams and scale effectively. I also work with TechX as an industry partner, as you know, so I'm very closely involved with energy and technology startups specifically. My focus being on helping founders navigate the many challenges of hiring, often in very fast-moving specialist markets. So I've 13 years experience within this area, and as you can imagine, I've seen a lot of things, both good, bad, and ugly. So hopefully I can give a few tips around, some of the common pitfalls in terms of recruitment and onboarding. So yeah, as you noted, I'll kick things off just by talking in turn about maybe 5 common challenges that I see founders face when recruiting. If that sounds good.
Perfect.
Brilliant. So I suppose that the first one, Ed, would be really striking the balance between cultural fit and technical fit when you're looking to hire new staff. So time and time again, I've seen, especially with really small organizations of 1, 2, 3 people, they often put an overemphasis on hiring for cultural fit at the expense of technical skills. So they'll meet someone, they'll be bowled over by the way they present, they get on really well with them, they could go out for a drink with them, they think, great, perfect fit. However, they don't necessarily have that specific experience needed to help them grow, be that particular software stack experience to help with product development, or it might be particular market segment expertise within sales to help penetrate the market that's important for that company. So the bottom line is both are incredibly important. You can't have one without the other. Likewise, someone could be technically amazing, but if you can't work with them, then it's game over in that sort of close-knit environment. So my advice is focus on both. And if you don't have the technical expertise required to assess that, say if you're a non-technical founder, then draft in help, ask a colleague, ask someone in your network, even draft in a contractor to help assess these things. So that would be my number one. Number 2, I've gone for the challenge around competing with big companies for talent, which I think is a really important one. You're going against big energy multinationals with huge budgets, big salaries, and really comprehensive benefits. It's really hard to compete with that. So my advice would be don't try ultimately, and focus on what makes your own proposition unique. What is your company's USP? So as a recruiter, common themes that I hear when I ask people, why did you join an early stage business, would be things like impact. I'm able to really have a big impact on the direction of a company, which you couldn't in a big multinational. It would be autonomy. So I've got, I've been given license to grow something. shaping something new from scratch. So all of these things are real selling points that you wouldn't get by joining a large corporate business. So focus on your strengths and use those hooks to try and attract people to the company would be my advice on that. You're never going to be able to compete with these global corporates in terms of salary and benefits. Number 3 would be simply knowing how to recruit, Ed. So I think a big thing that I see time and time again is companies don't necessarily know how to write a job advert. Many people assume that a job specification and a job advert are synonymous. And if you have a look on LinkedIn or Indeed, you'd be forgiven for thinking that, because often a lot of the job adverts do read as job specifications. So there's some key differences here. A job spec is an internal document which really outlines the key technical scopes and responsibilities. It's not meant for external consumption. So an advert is really supposed to sell the organization and attract potential candidates to that particular opportunity. So some things to bear in mind is when you're writing an advert, put yourself in the shoes of the candidate. So think, what's in it for me? And these benefits have to be articulated very early on in the advert to capture the candidate's attention, ultimately with the goal of getting them to read the whole advert and at the end of it, apply. So some things that you can include, or some benefits might be, involvement in cutting edge technology. It might be that the company mission around sustainability. It might be that there's a really clear progression opportunity to director level. Get these things in nice and early in the advert and make sure that you're really selling the role instead of just putting out a list of roles and responsibilities. Number 4 would be the challenge around onboarding. So you put in so much effort to sourcing the right candidate and attracting them and assessing them and hiring them. So what you don't want to do is mess that up in the opening couple of weeks. So common mistakes would be really not having an onboarding schedule which is structured and goal focused. So my advice would be to give that first week real structure. Do they need onboarding onto particular softwares or systems? Another really important thing is to sit down with them and be very clear around what the expectations might be in terms of key deliverables in the first week, month, 3 months, half a year. That way, that person has really clear expectations on what's expected of them, and it really helps to embed them within the business. And finally, a big one that I find with startups, especially given their fast-paced, dynamic nature, is staff retention, particularly when you bear in mind rates of stress and burnout within early stage companies. There's a lot expected of you. You're expected to wear many hats, and often it can feel like you're being pulled from pillar to post. So it's really important to proactively manage this with new hires and check in regularly with your staff. It doesn't have to be formal reviews every week. It could be an informal check-in. So look, Ed, how are you getting on this week? How is that project going? How are you feeling about things? And this means you're able to nip any issues early on in the bud, and you won't suddenly have someone handing in the notice out of the blue 2 or 3 months down the line, which is every company's worst nightmare, because they've invested that time and effort into all stages of the process. So there were many more, but they were 5 key challenges that I'd pinpointed just to discuss as a start for 10, I suppose.
There's lots that we'll pick into, actually, and I think that investment piece is a good point that you raise at the end there as well, because a lot of the technologies that we work with in the startups, they are so product focused, they are so technology focused, that is their passion, and they think that they're raising investment to build bits of kit, but actually one of the biggest investments they'll make is in the team. They are building, whether that technology works or not. If you have the right hires and the right team around you, you can pivot that technology, you can introduce new technologies, you can create a lot more commercial value. So making sure you get that right. So let's take it right back to the start, and I'm sure it'll touch across a few of these areas, but often you're starting with 1 or 2 co-founders. They maybe get their first bit of grant funding, or maybe they get some support from universities. They're then looking at their early hires, which are probably more on the technical side, and because this is often cutting edge, trying to find your first head of hydrogen engineering or your first head of electrical, it can be quite hard. You're looking for, almost a co-founder in some senses, because they're not going to have a team of 10 people yet. These people have to kind of know a bit of everything, and oftentimes no one's ever had a career in building this type of technology before. Your dream hire is someone who's worked at a startup, who has been the head of an engineering department, who has expertise in A, B, and C and technical skills in A, B, and C, but also those personality elements to be able to talk to the investors and talk about the technology. It's a lot to recruit for, Richard. So what's your experience of those early founders, and how do they kind of plan what those first hires should be, and then actually go about finding those maybe impossibly perfect candidates?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess there were a few questions kind of wrapped into that. I suppose I'd even like to take it back a stage earlier than that, Ed, in that the key thing of these sort of early stages of being really definite in terms of who it is you need to hire. So what is the position that actually needs to be brought on? And these are conversations I have quite regularly. I have a founder that approaches me, Ed, and says, look, I need to hire a CTO. I'll meet with them. I'll go through a few questions around where the gaps in knowledge are, what exactly they need someone to come in and execute. And it actually turns out they need an embedded software engineer, not a CTO. Mm-hmm. So it's really about discerning what are the key things that are missing in terms of the company's current skill set. And 9 times out of 10, that is, what does the company need to progress to the next level? What skills does the founder possess, and what skills are they missing? And then you're really hiring to plug those gaps in knowledge. So a lot of the time, the talent that needs to be brought in is driven by the knowledge of the founder. I think once you've established a clear job description and job brief, the most important thing alongside that, Ed, is a sense of realism in terms of, you're not going to get 100% of exactly what you need when you're making a hire. And if you go into the job market thinking you are, you're going to end up with a job vacancy which is live for 6 months. So my advice is always to narrow it down to 3 to 5 really core deliverables. And these are things that we can't do without. So if you don't have these skills, we couldn't hire you, no matter how amazing you are. So that might be mechanical engineering degree, it might be previous experience in process design, it might be having coached or mentored a team of some description. So really take the job spec, which is a guide, but then narrow it down to 3 to 5 core deliverables and try and be as flexible as possible. Are there any things that can be compromised on? Do we really need to bring someone on who's managed teams of 10 when we're only a team of 2? Mm-hmm. The broader you can make that person remit, the better chance you are of attracting a strong shortlist of 3 to 5 candidates, which is the goal, to then assess, put through the interview process and come out with a good hire. So just to summarize, make sure that you know who you're recruiting and why, and then try and be as flexible as possible on that remit. And then obviously the next step would be to design an actual recruitment process that is fit for purpose.
Yeah, really interesting, because I think a lot of the time those founders are hiring for the roles that they need right there and then, and that's at the top of their mind, being like, we need to get prototype 2 done, this is what we need. But actually, if you do it right, these hires are going to evolve. And I think that identifying your skills gaps, how much should founders be thinking bigger picture? Should they be sitting in that interview going, right, these key deliverables we need this year, this person is great for, but how much in the back of their head do they need to be thinking, well, actually, in 2 years' time, that person could be the head of an engineering department? Or is that something that you evolve later on in the process to think, well, actually, once we get bigger, maybe that person's the right fit, maybe they're not, we'll figure that out at the time? Or how much is the burden on them to pick that person who's going to cover all bases in the future as well?
Yeah, completely understand what you're asking there. I think without avoiding the question, Ed, it depends. It really depends on what the short-term deliverables are, what the 5-year plan is, and how those two things interact. So my advice tends to be to focus on the next year or two. So ultimately, as an example, if you don't hire someone with this specific software stack knowledge, you will not be able to develop your product, and there will not be a business to grow in 4 or 5 years' time. So my focus is always, as a priority, focus on what needs to be done in the next year or two. Do have one eye open on the bigger picture, and if at all possible, always hire with those sort of those skills in mind. However, the priority for me always needs to be on, like, what do we need now to help the company grow? If possible, hire someone who's fit for now and fit for the next 5-10 years. But ultimately, you need to hire for the here and now. And if that means hiring maybe more of a hands-on role at this stage and then bringing a CTO in at a later stage, then so be it. But yeah, like anything, it's a real balance, and it's so dependent on the individual state of play within that specific business.
Perfect. So you picked up on that. So the next step, you kind of got an idea of who you want to hire, and this maybe is that first hire, or maybe the first couple of hires. Talk us through maybe that recruitment process then. So again, maybe I'll start with a cheeky, possible controversial thing: is salary disclosure or not salary disclosure. Some places say very clearly, here's the benefits you're getting. Others have very vague, kind of find out when you apply, or salary is negotiable. For startups, what's more common, when they're filling in that application portal profile, job advert, how do they disclose those benefits?
Yeah, absolutely, Ed. So I suppose I'd preface this by saying there isn't any right or wrong answer. Again, it depends. You'll hear that a lot from me. If there was a right answer, then everyone would either be advertising salary or everyone wouldn't be. And if you go on your average job board, I'd suggest probably it's roughly a 50-50 split now. So what I can do is talk you through some of the pros and cons of both. I think in terms of the pros of advertising it, it shows a transparency, which I think candidates really like. And it also, I suppose, discourages lots of irrelevant applications. So if you're hiring a CTO and you don't put a salary in it, and your budget is 80 to 90K, say typical for an early stage startup, perhaps, I can guarantee that 60 or 70% of your applications will be from individuals who are on 100, 150K a year. So that adds kind of more work, because you need to speak to each of these individuals. You need to filter them out. It's also potentially a waste of both their time and yours, if indeed you invite them to interview, and have to address that salary issue fairly early on. So that's certainly one of the disadvantage, an advantage of doing that, in that you're not going to get loads of irrelevant people apply. I think generally the feedback I've had from candidates is they like companies that advertise salary, because job satisfaction and interest in the job is really important. But ultimately, candidates work in order to earn money to pay the bills and live the life they're after. So I think generally it goes down well with candidates. So my preference is to be transparent with salary, Ed, wherever possible. I suppose one of the advantages of not doing it, which I've seen, is I suppose to flip the first point on its head somewhat. If you advertise a role as 70 to 80K, however, if someone ticked 100% of the boxes, you would pay 90, 95. That perfect candidate might see the advert, be dissuaded from applying, and think, well, I'm after more than that. And that initial conversation doesn't even take place. So it's a real balance between trying to make your applicants as specific and as focused and relevant as possible, but without ruling out candidates who might be a little bit more expensive, who you'd actually consider if they did apply. Another common gripe with advertising the salary would be, if you put the salary advertised as 70 to 90, you can guarantee that 80% of the candidates who apply say they're looking for 90K, regardless of the depth of their experience. Because if someone's willing to pay up to that, you're always going to try and go in at that top end 9 times out of 10. So there are pros and cons to both. My advice to clients is to advertise wherever possible, because I feel that candidate perception and experience piece probably trumps a lot of those other points that I mentioned around extra work. I'd rather give them the best possible experience, show a transparency, and do it that way. Yeah, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Ed. If you were a candidate, would you think badly of a company if they didn't advertise, or would you prefer, prefer if they did?
Yeah, I think my preference is definitely the advertising of the salaries. I mean, I've worked in universities and things where there is clear salary banding, so it gives you that transparency of knowing where
Yeah.
you're going. And I guess for people working in the organization, but also I guess for startups, your budget and everything is so tight. You probably are quite limited in what you can and can't offer. So it probably gives you a framework of knowing.
Hmm.
But I can also see and I guess there is the possibility that you could advertise a salary, and then as they grow and develop, you could still offer more. The other thing that may be coming with these early hires is share options, stock options in the company, and the kind
Yeah.
of monetary value that they could have as well. So it might
Yeah.
be that we only have an investment amount of this, and we have to stretch that over 18 months. So we can't really offer more on salary on day-to-day pay, but actually if we hit these milestones or we achieve this next funding raise, or there's ways that I guess founders can incentivize talent. But I think being transparent with your workforce feels to me more an authentic representation of what they could and should be doing, I would say. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I would tend to agree with you. And but the point would be, if you don't advertise for whatever reason, make sure that you have that conversation, say over the phone, with the candidate before you invite them to interview, because
Yeah.
I've heard horror stories of individuals who've been through 2 or 3 stage lengthy interview processes and then are made offers that are 20K under their current salary, and it's just
Mm.
horrendous. It's so bad for your company's perception in the broader market, and it's just a waste of everyone's time as well. So regardless of whether you do or don't, it's certainly something that needs to be addressed right at the start of the process in one form or another.
Yeah. And startups are going to have to, budget map this out. Their investors are going to want to know what you're able to pay at those levels. So that's quite helpful. One of the other areas, maybe in that recruitment process, practically, I guess there's lots of different things. There's loads of different tools, systems. You've got LinkedIn, you've got Indeed, and then I guess the other dimension is now AI, in terms of lots of applicants, possibly AI generated CVs and cover letters. I think we've heard
Yeah.
anecdotes from startups where one of our startups, I think most recently advertised for a developer role, and they had something like 400 applications. It's just huge volumes. And I think partly they were reflecting is this because they've used a system that's really easy to apply. It's like one click, one button, or applicants are able to use AI to apply for many, many jobs. So what are some practical things that you've seen work or not work in terms of tools, systems, to get through that recruitment process?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think again, it's really role specific, Ed. So, say if I advertise for a CTO role, then on average, I'd maybe get 50 or 60 applications, which is a good amount, but certainly I'm able to physically go through those and review each one in turn, and bear in mind as well that these are being drip fed through to you as well. They're not all coming in one big batch. So um, certainly, I've in my own experience, I've not seen some of these enormous volumes, although I have heard stories of hundreds of people applying. I think really the method you use to deal with this would come down to size and scale. I think if you work for a Google or a Facebook, and you're advertising for software engineer, you need to be prepared. You're going to get hundreds, if not thousands, of applications. To me, at that point, it would be appropriate to use some kind of screening tool. Be that AI word search or something that can help to automate that process. If you were a small SME, so a startup founder with a 2-3 person business, I'd be gobsmacked if you were receiving enough applications to warrant something like that. So I suppose for the purpose of our audience today, I'd be really surprised if it ever got to the stage where they were receiving an unmanageable number of applications. So I think certainly those sort of technologies have their place. As far as I'm aware, there isn't any way yet of discerning whether or not a CV was made using AI. other than potentially using AI to see if it can tell that it was made by itself, which potentially it could. But from my experience, I'll take the CV on face value. I'll look at the skills and experience that were articulated, and then I'll try and progress that to some sort of more personal conversation as soon as possible. Get someone on the phone, get someone on Microsoft Teams, get someone in front of you, and get to that human stage of the process as quickly as possible. There are some larger corporates now who, are using AI to carry out first interviews, and whilst I understand it from a time management perspective, I don't think it's the way forward. I think really you need to keep that human element to the process, both in terms of assessing that individual, but then also in terms of attracting that individual to the business, because ultimately, being interviewed by a robot doesn't give any indication of what the hiring manager is going to be like to work for. What's the team dynamic like? So again, really depends in terms of size and structure. Certainly, there is a place for these sort of AI tools and filtering techniques, but certainly for the purposes of our audience today, I'd say it's highly unlikely. And if you did get 300 applications for a position, then I commend you. You're doing a lot better than most.
Yeah. And my own experience of hiring, I think it's exactly that, in that I think there is a place where there's a quick screen. So exactly that. What are those 4 or 5 things that you absolutely need? And if a candidate is completely, that's where you can hopefully do those quick screens, and possibly some of the tools and systems. You'll be able to filter by education or something, and remove those that don't qualify. But I also think it's always a two-way street, and I often think organizations are a little bit too selfish in times in terms of focusing on their own needs and not really reflecting that of the exciting possible candidates they get. And even if there's a candidate that isn't successful, you may have other opportunities that you don't want to burn those bridges with. So exactly as you said, giving that human contact, making sure that you are, reflecting if exactly in terms of if I was the startup and I was using AI and I was screening all the applications with AI, I understand why it's efficient, but equally, this is your choice that you're making. So if you rely on the AI and then you get to these final candidates, who are you missing out on that you've not properly looked into? Is worth bearing in mind.
Yeah, definitely. No, I guess there were 2 points just to pick up on there, Ed. I think one is, if I'm on the fence as to someone's relevancy, I'll always give them a call and have a chat with them, because often not every single thing that someone's done has been listed on the CV. They might have experience in certain softwares that aren't listed. They might have, managed projects for certain customers that aren't explicitly listed. And I've had that many a time where I've given someone the benefit of the doubt, given them a call, had a chat with them, and they've actually ended up getting the position. Whereas, someone less experienced might have not seen a keyword on a CV and discarded them. So, giving people the benefit of the doubt at that early stage and having that human interaction, 100%. The second thing I'd like to pick up on, Ed, was what you said around the candidate experience, which is you can't overemphasize the importance of that. So a candidate experience during a recruitment process is ultimately a piece of marketing for your company. How they're treated, ultimately how that whole process makes them feel, because it is a very emotional journey. It's the excitement of seeing the job advert and thinking, oh, that looks great. It's the hope after you've clicked apply. It's the disappointment when you realize that you haven't been successful. So managing those emotions and remembering there's a human behind those messages is really important, because if you annoy someone, or they're really disgruntled about how they're treated during an interview process, you can bet your bottom dollar that they'll tell 3 or 4 of their colleagues, who'll then have second thoughts about applying to your company in the future as well. So there's a human aspect to it. You want to treat people fairly, and then there's also the kind of marketing aspect, where your company is a reflection of how you treat people ultimately. So it will have an impact on your ability to recruit in the future if you don't treat people well.
And then moving into that recruitment process, finding the talent is absolutely the big challenge maybe. Hopefully you get lots of those applications, but equally you're really looking for specialist skills. What are some practical things that you see work well for energy tech startups in terms of recruiting talent? You know, where should they be looking? Where should they be posting? How do you
Yeah.
find, you know, those leads?
Yeah, great. So I guess you can break the recruitment process down into two rudimentary sections. You've got the candidate attraction bit, and then the candidate assessment. So you've got making people want to apply and getting people into the start of that process funnel, and then you've got the interview process itself. So if we're looking at that candidate attraction piece, Ed, initially, I guess there were multiple channels that you use, but for individuals, founders who were looking to recruit directly, you know, probably the most pertinent one will be advertising. So you can't overestimate the power of a compelling, well-worded advert, which really sells the benefits of the position, why someone would want to come and do that job, and also the company. So absolutely advertise it. And you know, the best platforms to use in terms of advert response that I've seen certainly is still LinkedIn and Indeed. They still seem to be the main ones in terms of volume of applications. So that would be step one. The other really key component is using your network. So say for a TechX alumni, for instance, who else did they meet within that process when they were going through the TechX program? You know, who do they know that might have studied with someone who has a similar skill set? You know, did they do a PhD in a certain area of electronic engineering? Might they know someone? So think, like, I need someone with these skills. Who might I know who might know someone? And then really sort of tapping into those networks. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help and advice. Another great hunting ground for these kinds of positions are industry events. So you wouldn't believe the number of times that I've gone to a specific industry event and bumped into a candidate who just happens to be perfect for this position that I'm recruiting for. And it's the best feeling in the world when you've put yourself out there and you bump into someone with that skill set. If they don't know anyone, if they're not the right person, might they know someone? People generally like to help when asked for help and advice. So the two main channels, Ed, are advertising and networking. It is difficult. So that's why companies like ours exist. When they are struggling to recruit via advertising through their own networks, tap into a specialist recruitment agency. They've got huge depths of people that they know or have registered previously, huge databases of individuals, often with very niche skill sets, and they spend their lives networking in these spaces. So completely understand, in the first instance, try and do it yourselves, try and attract people via advertising and networking. If that doesn't help, look at plan B, which would be to engage a specialist in this area who can hopefully identify that talent. In terms of the process itself, key things to remember are, the process wants to be thorough. So you want to make sure that you're assessing the two things that I mentioned at the start: cultural fit and technical fit. Can they deliver on the key points and the key deliverables? Could I work with this person? Are they going to add value to the organization? So that's the first thing. It needs to be thorough. And secondly, it needs to be engaging. So you need to be in a position where at the end of this interview process, the candidate actually wants to work with you. So it's a two-way sell. And you need to bear that in mind right from those initial conversations. So always be selling the business. If you decide that the candidate isn't the right fit, then that's absolutely fine. You haven't lost anything by selling the company. But what it does mean is that when you do decide on your preferred option in terms of your hire, that you have sold the business and they are far more likely to join you. So in order to keep the process relatively slick, I'd recommend 2 stages normally. An initial hour with them, which will be a little bit more informal, more of a get to know you exercise. So you can tell them about what your company does, what the mission is, what the culture is, why you're hiring for this role, to build that engagement. Then you're getting a bit of information from the candidate around what they've done previously, what their skill set is, how they like to work, what kind of person they are. So really gauging whether or not there's that initial fit, and then follow that up by a second stage interview, which is usually a little bit longer, maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours, and slightly more formalized in terms of structure. So that could be some more structured competency type style questioning. It could be a technical test, say if you need specific software programming skills in C++, you can put them through a practical test, because I could write on my CV, I can program in C++, but I can't. So you need to assess these things. It could also encompass some sort of presentation as well. So you can ask them to go away, prepare something to present back, and then have a bit of a Q&A. So key things, again, it needs to be thorough. It needs to assess both cultural and technical fit, and it needs to be a good, smooth experience for a candidate. And another point alongside that is, good candidates are often interviewing for 3 or 4 good, positions at any given time. So if you take 6 to 8 weeks to go through a recruitment process, if the candidate's good, they'll not be around by the time you get to make them an offer. You'll guarantee that a company will have done 2-stage interviews in a week or 2, offered them, and then they'll accept. So a bit of pace, a slickness of process, selling the company, and thoroughness are the kind of key pillars to consider, Ed, when you're designing a recruitment process. But as you rightly know, a lot of the challenges nowadays are around the first part of that recruitment process, which is the candidate attraction. It's finding people with those skills, and then making those people, or trying to get those people to want to join you.
Yeah, there's nothing worse, I guess. I've been in the same situation where you go through the interview process. You've done a number of different interviews and stages, and I also think you've got to be careful when you're in that final 1 or 2, because if you are in the case where you've got a preferred choice, but actually they aren't available, if you've burnt your bridges with maybe your second or third candidate, or kind of, I don't know, you knew from the second interview who you're kind of wanting, so you're kind of performatively doing the second and third candidate meetings. You still need to be selling the company, so that they may still be a good candidate to have. And you've touched on the other area that I wanted to pick in, was actually your view on tasks and practicals, because there's also this challenge between not overburdening the candidates with this huge body of work. You see lots of stuff online around some of these recruitment processes that people go through, where it's 7 or 8 interviews, they've got 2-hour tasks, they've got exams, they've got all these things which might be necessary, but actually how difficult is that? And I think for startups, I've often seen sometimes maybe it's in the presentation or in a task, there's this, the candidates are giving all these great ideas to the startup. You've got to be a bit careful. I also think about what the task brief is, because if I was the candidate and you're asking me, hi, you're coming in for a marketing role, can you create a presentation with your top 10 ideas about marketing? You didn't get the role, but we've now got these top 10 ideas. So talk to me just about that practical task. How do you set it up? How do you know when it's too much or too little? What's your experience of that?
Yeah, absolutely, Ed. So my take on it will be, a practical task, if appropriate, is great. And I suppose in my view, what defines whether or not it's appropriate would be, is it testing a skill or quality that individual will need to have in role once in situ? So, for instance, if you're hiring for a sales manager opportunity, I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask them to go away and, construct and deliver a 15 to 20-minute presentation on a topic, because ultimately they'll be doing that in their position. If they're successful, they'll be expected to communicate clearly, organize information, present information in a compelling way to a live audience. So ultimately, that is the quality you're looking to test. On the flip side of that, if you're hiring a niche technical analysis role, like an FEA specialist in mechanical engineering, or a PhD in photonics, or whatever it might be, don't make them do a presentation, because it's not something that they're going to be doing. Individuals of that nature sometimes have a tendency to be more introverted. I might actually put them off the role when in the reality they might have all the skills necessary to do that. So tests and practicals are fine, but always think of the why. Why do I need this individual to do that? What skills or qualities am I trying to test here? So really good ones would be presentations for sales roles. I really like that, because if someone can't deliver a presentation under pressure, then they'll probably struggle once in situ. A technical test for software engineers and on programming, I think, is more important than ever now, because, as you say, it's so easy to pull together a perfect CV and not actually have those skills. So you really need to check that that individual's technically competent. And if it's some sort of operational leadership role, really trying to drill down into those leadership skills, and that again could be via some sort of task or presentation or role play. So I personally quite like them. I think they're quite good for candidate engagement. However, they can be awful for candidate engagement if used in the wrong way, and if they're used in a not really kind of relevant, specific manner. And I've seen people, predominantly engineers, withdraw from processes because they've been asked to present in front of 5 or 6 people for half an hour. It's not something that they're comfortable doing, nor is it something that they necessarily have to do in post. So it doesn't help on that candidate attraction piece. I think when it comes to, I think the last point you mentioned around being asked to do a presentation, and I suppose your question was around doing free work for the organization, or potentially them stealing your ideas, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess really you've just got to make a judgment call on that, Ed. And I suppose at the start of the presentation, you could preface it by the fact that you've kept it relatively general. And I think so long as your presentation it answers the question, if it's on brand, and if it communicates some knowledge of how you go about creating things as a candidate, that's fine. How specific you go into things ultimately is a judgment call. But I do get your point. I think often there's this perception that companies might be interviewing almost as a kind of information farming exercise. So it's taking all the information. So I think you can kind of address at the start of the presentation that you've taken a rather general approach, and then make a judgment call. But it is a tricky one, and it's one that there's honestly no clear answer for, I suppose, in that respect. But more generally, I really like that sort of practical test element, so long as it's relevant and applied well.
I'm the same. I've had to wrestle that exact dilemma of the sort of free work thing, because I also I often have practical tests when I've been recruiting, but try to make it mirror the company as much as possible. So sometimes we even get them sitting with the team and getting to have conversations and asking questions, so that the practical exercise is, well, this is what it might be like to work here. So do you actually like the way that we work and the types of things? This is how I might give you a task if you're in this role, so they kind of get that real experience of the company, so that yes, it's useful for us to see your workload, but equally, I've also had others where it's like an exam, and it's very artificial, for people to feel like, is this what the company's like? Am I going to be in these, intense task-based delivery methods? So I think finding that balance of authentic, practical.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes, you don't even have to position it as being a task as such. So I've often seen for more technical engineer type positions, or more hands-on sort of technician type roles, where they'll take a potential candidate around the manufacturing shop floor, and really they're almost assessing them on their interaction with the equipment and what questions they're asking. So it's kind of not saying, this is a test, but it's seeing how they kind of react to what they're seeing, the types of questions that they're asked, and how they're kind of responding to the technologies. So there's lots of ways to do it. And I think you're totally right. The route you choose has to be very sort of tailored and specific to the organization. And you don't want to put someone through, a process that's going to kind of scare them off necessarily, or kind of put them off joining. That's the last thing you want to do.
Definitely. So we've got a sense of the planning and the strategy and identifying the gaps and figuring out who you recruit. We had to think about all the different methodologies in terms of how you get that talent awareness and acquisition, and now kind of work through some of those recruitment activities. So maybe the next theme to explore is, let's say you've hopefully done some successful hires, they're joining the business. What about that onboarding and I guess retention elements that you also brought up as some of the challenge areas? What are some of the best practices you've seen? Maybe thinking of a first year or a first 18 months of a promising candidate joining an energy tech startup. If you're the founder, what is your responsibility? What could you be doing that would keep them onboarded well and keep them in the business longer term?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose I'd prefix this by saying that the success of the onboarding starts even earlier. So it starts during the interview process itself, because what you don't want to do is sell a dream, make out that the company is in a position that it's not, make out that the world will be doing all of this glamorous stuff when you're not. So the biggest reason I see people contact me and say, look, I'm looking to leave in the first 2-3 months, is that the role wasn't as sold. And that really puts individuals off, because it either indicates that the founder doesn't know their own business, or that they were being intentionally deceptive, neither of which are particularly good. So that continuity between what's discussed at interview and what the candidate experiences on the first day, that is the biggest determining factor to retention in that early stage. So that's number one. I think number two, Ed, in terms of the success of the onboarding, is really around clear structure. So on day one, you can sit down with the individual who's starting and saying, right, welcome to the team. This is a plan of what your first week will look like, what your first month will look like, what your first 3 months look like. And here are some kind of rough expectations around where we expect our knowledge to be at these different stages. And this is what we're going to do to help you get to that stage. So especially with startups, often there can be a real lack of structure. Things can be a bit all over the shop. There might not be anyone else in the office in certain days, and the worst thing for engagement is feeling sort of lost and at sea. So the key thing in that onboarding structure, Ed, is real. It's to give a real structure. So this is what we're going to do in the first week. These are the targets for 30, 60, 90 days, and then reviewing them, ideally on a weekly basis, even if it's just for 5 minutes. So look, how did we get on this week? How did you get on with these goals? What do we need to do? What support and training can we offer? So really providing that sort of structural framework around the candidate to make them feel, looked after, and give them a real sense of purpose. So that to me is the key thing when it comes to onboarding, as well as effectively integrating them with the broader team as well. So get them some proper FaceTime, even if they're a remote worker. Get them in with the team. Get them brought into the vision. So I think if an individual is really bought into the why, what is the company mission? What is the bigger purpose of this software that I'm programming? It makes going to work, so much easier and more engaging, because you've got that bigger picture. So it's about that structure, but then also about being brought into the team ethos and the company mission as well. They're all really important. And if you get all three of those right, you're not going to have many people leave.
Yeah. And it's maybe a silly analogy, but I think one of the challenges that startups will have is often the co-founders maybe are friends, or they've known each other from university, or maybe the early hires have been working together on this in a couple of years. So it's a bit like being at school and somebody new moves to your team, and you're kind of trying to make friends with them, but you've got all these inside jokes, you've got all these traditions that they don't understand. And if you want that person to properly be part of the group, you've got to be more accessible. So in a company, that might be thinking about your abbreviations and tags, it'll be thinking about your kind of social norms, and realizing that actually you're maturing now in terms of a business. It's not just you and your pals tinkering about. If you've got investment, if you're bringing on team members, you have to break your maybe habits a little bit to be a bit more professional, to say, well, I know the CTO is my best pal and we go to lunch every day, but how's that going to look for the new chief financial officer that,
Yeah,
we're suddenly hanging out all the time? So I think bearing that in mind around the culture and keeping people part of it and making it feel welcoming. What are any other practical things to make the culture work? How do you make people feel welcome? How do you kind of break down barriers to new people coming in? Because also I imagine in that phase of growth that startups are in, there could be new people coming in every couple of weeks, months. It's a very dynamic time. So again, what are the cultural tips and tricks that you might have seen that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing is just, I think FaceTime is really important, Ed. I think like nowadays with a lot of like hybrid and remote working, it's becoming less and less of a thing. But I think especially in those early days, nothing makes you feel more bedded in than spending time with someone in person. So my suggestion would be is, make sure, especially in that first month, there's at least 2 or 3 days per week that the entire team are getting together in the office. It means you're able to, have a chat next to the water cooler about what TV series you're watching, or, did you watch the football game last night, or, what you're up to tonight. It's those little personal interactions that can make you feel, part of something. So for me, there's no substitute for that. So that the more FaceTime you can have with someone, the better. Also, things like social events as well. Offering to take any new start out for lunch with the team in the first week. It doesn't have to be, back in old school days, it would be, let's take you out and we'll all drink 12 pints together. People aren't like that as much nowadays, so it doesn't have to be involving alcohol, but something where it's like we're making an effort to get to know you as an individual, and we're going to take you out on a social event. I think that's really important as well. So to summarize, regularity of face-to-face contact and having those interactions that aren't purely work-based, and then ideally some sort of social events that you've gone to the effort of organizing, but one that is inclusive as well. So not everyone wants to go to the pub or stay out until 1 a.m. drinking. So be mindful of different personalities as well.
And for any of the founders that are, you maybe read lots of startup books, it doesn't, at least from my experience of reading them, doesn't need to be the most corporate thing in the world. Sometimes these early stage gatherings and things can be absolutely part of the culture. I think one of our startups spoke about how they did fondue Fridays in their offices and all their neighbors hated them because the place stunk of cheese. But, it's these little things that become part of the history and the tradition. And, as that grows up, I'm sure, I can't remember what it was in the Netflix book, but again, I think they similarly had lots of those early kind of social experiences as well. I guess, sorry, did you want to bring
I completely agree. I think I've come across organizations that it's just little things like every Friday we finish a couple of hours early and have a barbecue in the summer. Little things where it's sort of enmeshing you with the business, not just from a, and see it as more than just a job. So I completely agree with that.
Yeah. And making it, hopefully, and at least from my point of view, startups and founders are so busy, they've maybe never been managers before, they're maybe new to these. So I've often used my diary as my Bible. So if I know things like one-to-ones or things like, well-being check-ins or personal development check-ins or, quarterly planning meetings, things that you should do. And you say in those meetings, if you sit in the induction and say, I'll be checking in with you every couple of weeks and we'll be doing this, that, or the other. And then a couple of weeks go by and you're distracted and busy and you've lost track of it. I think being clear to say, if I promise something, let's get it in the diary. It can move, it can change, but actually if it's diarized, you'll remember in 6 months' time to do these things versus trying to just remember as and when, because it can be quite hard to keep on top of, especially for some of these founders. They've never maybe managed people before, so you kind of want to just let them get on with it. But actually, what are some tips for founders who have never had these human resources roles before to try and make sure they are, even things like one-to-ones, managing performance reviews, like what do they need to know to kind of get those processes off the ground?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I suppose what's key in that respect is really just make sure that you and any other members of the organization, agree on a set, structured, I suppose you call it an organizational rhythm. So any employee that we bring on, they will have a one-to-one every month on the last Tuesday of every month, and that's how we're going to manage it. And you need to be quite structured, and you need to stick to that, because ultimately nothing's more of a turn off to engagement than your manager cancelling a one-to-one an hour before because they've got something that they see as a bigger priority. Because what that screams is, you're not as important as this next thing, and there's nothing more important than staff. So one, agree on a kind of organizational rhythm. Could be monthly meetings, it could be quarterly, more formal reviews, where you're looking at the quarter that's just gone, what are your targets for the next little period, and what do you need in order for us to help you reach those goals. So there needs to be, in my opinion, definitely a structure. I also think at least a little bit of kind of formality helps in that respect as well. I think when it is such a, sometimes such a casual environment, that you need that little bit of formality to these kind of things, just to make sure that you cover off all of these things that need addressing. And purely from a diary management perspective, once you have decided on what this organizational rhythm looks like, all you need to do is send out as a repeating event on your Outlook calendar. As you say, if it's in your calendar and you stick to it without question, month in, month out, then it becomes a real habit, and that's a great way to keep engagement. So I think just and if you can start doing this when you're a company of 3 people, it makes it a hell of a lot easier when you were a company of 10 or 15, because there were processes in place that you stick to and follow. So that repeatability and the structure is key, along with that these meetings being not just catch up with a coffee or a pint, but there were key things that you're looking to cover around objectives, goals, and training and development.
Yeah, there's lots of different approaches. You hear lots of books. So I think I was listening to a podcast the other day that had the NVIDIA tech startup CEO, and I think he was talking about how he has 60 direct reports, doesn't do a single one-to-one, and if anything he needs to share, he wants everyone together to hear it at the same time. But equally, if he has to criticize someone's work, he also thinks, well, why shouldn't everyone hear that criticism? Now, that might work in some cases for these big creative startups, but equally you have to understand the type of business, the type of people you're working with. So, I mean, my preference is to have some of that formality baked into your process, so that, because equally at some point you're going to have investors, you're going to have customers. So it's thinking about the type of business and what the expectations are going to be to try and set them early. But I guess startups have to figure it out. There is lots of interesting novel management approaches by some of the kind of bold CEOs that are building these big companies that I guess founders.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I guess there's no one way that's gonna cut. But I think for me, if I was pulled up on any mistakes in front of the entire organization, I wouldn't be in that organization for very long. It wouldn't sit well with me. I'm sure there'll be others that wouldn't mind, but definitely not for me. I think that's something that needs to be done, in private.
Yeah. So we are almost out of time, but that's been a really wide-ranging conversation, from how we find that talent, how we make them valued, how we bring them into their companies. I guess any other reflections on how, as startups are scaling and building these teams bigger? I guess we don't have much time to go into a lot of it, but the 2 other topics that kind of popped into my head were things like contractors, and also things like how you build and scale your team in terms of building a diverse workforce and making sure you get, a variety of experiences. So as you're starting to get to 20, 30, 40 people in a team, are there other considerations founders should start bringing in?
Absolutely. So just to answer the first point briefly, contractors can be a really useful resource for more kind of short-term niche tasks. So that tend to be, say if there's a defined project with a finite beginning and end, where you need some specialist expertise. You're not going to need them after the 6-month period, but you need that experience now. So it might be come in and do some CFD analysis on this turbine design that we've created, or it could be come and look at this electrolyzer. Is it going to work from an electronics perspective? So it's that more niche finite project, perfect for a contractor. Things to bear in mind with contractors is they are expensive. That's why they do it, because they're trading security and definite work for financial reward ultimately. So wherever possible, if it's going to be a longer term hire, you want to bring someone in on a permanent basis. And I think the second question you had, Ed, was around the sort of longer term recruitment planning and how best to go about that. Would that be fair? Yeah. So I think that the best way to look at that is you really need a kind of at least a biannual review on where the organization is, where it wants to be in 6 months, and what resource are you lacking internally in order to get from A to B. So, for instance, if your plan is to start penetrating some international markets, but you've only got an internal salesperson on your 6-month plan, it's going to be right. We need to recruit, source, and hire a sales manager with international experience. So, I think these kind of regular talent reviews internally, where you're thinking, right, we're at A at the minute, we want to be at B in 6 months. What additional resource do we need to get there? So that's how you do it. Basically, you're looking at the current structure, where the company wants to get to and what's missing. And then you've got budgetary considerations rolled into that. So often it's a case of, right, we've got X amount of money to hire. We need all these people, but what's priority? What do we need soonest? So really taking that more structured view over, the business over the course of the next half a year, and then prioritizing those hires, and often not trying to hire everyone at once as well. So really thinking, right, well, what we want to do is hire an engineering manager, and then once they're on board, they can hire a mechanical engineer and a project engineer. So it's all looking at things in a structured way over the course of the next few months and thinking strategically before you then go out and actually say, right, I'm writing a job advert, we're bringing in this person. So nothing particularly groundbreaking there, to be honest, but it is just really taking that bigger picture view and taking into account what needs to be done to get there.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Richard. That is our time up today. So loads of really interesting topics and plenty more I'm sure we could go into. But if startups want to know more and have more questions about recruitment, then Richard and the team at Talent Spark at Eden Scott, I'm sure we'll be able to explore further. So thanks for joining us for this latest EnergyTech Essentials, a series of podcasts and webinars all about those finite topics that might be a challenge if you're building an energy tech business, and perhaps if you are in the process of building one or already on it, you could connect with some of our amazing partners that we work with through our TechX Accelerator to find out a little bit more. So feel free to tune in for future episodes, and thank you so much for joining us in today's. Thank you, Richard.